What up, fam? Pat for This Land Batten here, and I'm talking to you about Victory Gardens. Now, I want to start off this video with a straight disclaimer to where if you are an experienced or seasoned gardener, there's not a lot I'm going to throw in here that's going to be useful to you, and I would send you to, if you want more in-depth and detailed gardening advice and know-how, I'd send you to YouTube channels such as Am I Gardener or Self-Sufficient Me that go in-depth on how to really kind of homestead and produce your own food from your own land. This is for someone that doesn't know how to get started. Also, I want to talk about the past and the present, because right now there's a huge push for victory gardens going on. Grow your own food at home. But to understand why that's particularly important, I want to talk about where they started and why it's a big deal for us now when there's no war going on, no major world war that we're involved in, yet the idea of having your own food grown on your own land is very important under our conditions. So where did it get started? Well, World War I. We're talking about an idea and propaganda that's over 100 years old. During the First World War, one of the problems Europe was facing is that so many of its agricultural workers and farmers were actually off on the battlefield dying real quick. While they were there doing that, they were not at home growing food for the nations that they came from. That became a problem. During the bulk of the First World War, the United States was not directly involved in combat on the ground, but they were involved in trying to support the European nations fighting with arms and supplies. And so a lot of the burden of feeding Europe fell onto the United States through the treaties that we formed. During this time, leading up to our involvement in the war in 1917, the National War Garden Commission was formed. And the job of the War Garden Commission was to spread propaganda and information, pamphlets, to help people start what they called a victory garden. You can see Lady Liberty walking through a field sowing seeds of victory. And the information they spread out was how to plant a garden, how to protect it from pests, and how to grow your own food. Because not only had we been supporting Europeans with the food we were sending them, we were now going to have to feed our own troops that we were sending over there, which means here on home soil, a lack of food. So, victory gardens. And even during that time, the Federal Bureau of Education, is what it was called then, started something called the United States Student Garden Army, where they were teaching kids in schools and converting property on the school grounds into gardens and teaching them how to create and grow their own food. Public land was used. They said use vacant lots, put gardens wherever you can put them. A huge chunk of Golden Gate Park in San Francisco was plowed over, tilled, and converted into gardens and held over 800 individual garden plots for people in the city. And by the time the war was over in 1918, there were over 8 million individual garden plots producing food for the people. That idea of a victory garden kind of faded away because, well, the Great Depression showed up. They turned from victory gardens into survival gardens, and then times started to get a little bit better after, well, we're not here to talk about the Great Depression, but they really picked up and got well for us economically during World War II, where the victory garden idea reemerged and became an even bigger deal, because this time we were seriously involved. Now, prior to our actual direct involvement in the war, after the attack on Pearl Harbor, we were again supporting European nations, the Allied nations, with munitions, supplies, and food like that, things like that. But after the attack on Pearl Harbor, the patriotic fervor of the Victory Garden really picked up steam, to the point where by the time the war ended in 1944, there were 40% of all produce consumed in the nation was produced in people's personal victory gardens. Rooftop gardens, balcony gardens. If there was a container you could put dirt in, they wanted you to put dirt in there and plant some tomatoes. If you had a pile of soil, they wanted you to fill that with potatoes and grow your own food. More detailed pamphlet information was released on how to turn a certain plot of land, a certain size, and plant them in succession with different crops throughout a year so that it was continually productive, and just how much of what kinds of seeds during what time of the year a person or a family should plant in order to feed however big the family is. There's actually a link in the description below to a PDF of one of the actual Victory Garden leadership pamphlets that was distributed in 1944, where you can really see the depth of involvement that people were getting into. It was a total of 20 million gardens in 1944 with 8 million tons of produced, and like I said before, that's 40%. 4 out of every 10 pieces of produce that were eaten by people in the country were grown in their own gardens, and that's a huge number. So why does that matter here and now? Why do we want to worry about that here and now? Well, as this pandemic is spreading, it's becoming clear just how globalized our food supply chains were. If you consider the kinds of foods that we were getting that came from Mexico or that came from New Zealand, and think of it in our area here, Central Washington, agricultural businesses are struggling because the bulk of what we sold went to Asia. Our apples, our cherries, our pears. We sold a lot to other countries. They're not receiving food from us because of the pandemic. And there's other foods that we are not receiving from other nations because of the pandemic. So we're starting to actually see filtering through supply chain problems in grocery stores and other places. And it's not because people aren't growing the food necessarily. It's not because our truckers aren't still driving. It's because the interconnection of all of our global economic systems are being shaken by the fact that people don't want to spread this disease. Hence the Victory Garden and hence the talk of it now. You are supporting not only your family and yourself, but you're supporting the nation at large, and for those that can't have gardens, by planting your own as best you can. And there's a number of ways you can do that, ranging from plowing your entire yard. However, if you live on a acre plot, plow the whole thing over and start going full agriculture, to maybe I only have a small area. You can do more companion planting and dense forest gardening, or if you live in an apartment and you don't have one, you can cut open a milk jug. And I want to show you some of those ways that we've been working on our little quarter-acre plot here to support our family with food as much as we can, as well as some of the ways you can do if you don't have much and all you can afford is seeds and a cubic foot of soil. You can still start growing your own food in your own home and be ready to go. So let's head down to the garden and check out what we've got going on. So just behind me over here is a plot of land that is roughly the footprint of our family van, maybe a little bit, yeah, about that. The mounds that you see there, there's a video that I have started earlier on that you can go check out, but it's the Three Sisters planting, and the companion planting techniques allow you to put multiple kinds of plants inside a smaller footprint area to increase your yield. And so what we're doing here is we're going to have, again, in roughly the footprint of our car, pounds and pounds and pounds of food coming from corn and beans and squash and pumpkins, as well as a number of sunflower seeds have volunteered themselves, so we'll let the sunflowers go because they'll sit above everything else, and we'll be able to get sunflower seeds out of that. This is one way where if you just have a plot of land that you want to put in there, you can actually grow a lot of food in a little bit of space. But maybe say you don't want to till up the yard or dig up grass or anything like that. Maybe you don't even have one. There's still a cheap and easy way for you to set up and create planters that allow you to still grow food in a useful way. Let's check out a couple ideas over here. So what you see here is I've got a shipping pallet, I've got a few planter boxes. Now the reason we did this over here is because the soil underneath is not actually very good because the tree has augmented the soil chemistry. But that's okay because all of these planter boxes you see here were recycled wood from a fence someone tore down they didn't want anymore. Again, super free like the ground. We had dirt already that we augmented with mulch. That's the one thing we had to buy. And this shipping pallet here was also an item that was free that we found. No one wanted it because it was already so old and falling apart that it wasn't useful. We again filled it with dirt and mulch, and inside of the cracks and in between the slats we planted strawberries. It was cheap, it was easy, and again in a roughly small square foot area we're going to be producing lettuce, spinach, kale, strawberries, and we did it for little to no money. Gardens are easy if you're crafty and careful about it. Let's check out some other smaller, more cost-effective and space-effective options that you can choose. So here I am still sitting in my yard, sitting on a bucket, and buckets are actually things that I want to talk to you about. Inside of these buckets here, can't really see them sprouting out yet, but I planted some seed potatoes inside of some mulch inside of a 5-gallon bucket. As those, or not, I said tomatoes, potatoes, as those things grow up taller, I'll keep adding some soil into them and they'll keep producing potatoes inside of this bucket all the way up to the top until I dump them out and I harvest potatoes. This one 5-gallon bucket, in the square footage footprint that it has, will be able to produce, should be a few pounds of potatoes, and I have 2 of them here. Again, 5-gallon bucket, $3, soil, $2 to $6 depending on what you're getting, seed potatoes, a couple of dollars. Done. Now I have a lot of food that I can feed my family. I also have in here an excellent pot with an excellent tomato in it. Potato, tomato, tomato, potato, you know what I'm saying. But again, here I have, what, less than 3 square feet of actual footprint real estate being taken up. And with these pots and these plants, if I have a balcony or I have a window somewhere, right, I have a deck, whatever it is, it doesn't take up a lot of space, but it's still able to produce food and sustain me and my family for whatever it is, or however much they're able to provide, right? And to my right and left, I also have these, again, raised beds. They're not raised super high. If you want to have a raised bed yourself and you don't have good soil underneath, you can build a planter box. Most plants don't need a ton of root space, right? 15 to 30 centimeters, right, of actual root space to grow in. Underneath these planter boxes, we have more good soil so they can go deeper if they want. But you could build a planter box. If we look at these, again, recycled wood over here, recycled wood. For everything that we put into those planter boxes, the augmented mulch, the recycled wood, the paint, and the plants themselves, each one costs less than $10. If you've got enough extra space on, say, your driveway where you could build a raised bed out of recycled wood, whatever you can find, be crafty. I mean, repossess an old dresser, drawers out of an old dresser can be turned into planter boxes, right? Anything like that, if you can put dirt in it, you can put a plant in it, and you can grow your own food. Each of these was less than $10 to get going, and they're going to produce well over $10 worth of food, and they'll continue to do so for years to come. And especially if we're using careful planting techniques of entering in plants later in the year after we harvest here, we'll get way over $10 worth of food out of this that we created for ourselves. But there's still one more interesting way to check it out. Let's go look. Yeah, that's right. Planting in milk jugs. So if you're out there buying milk and you're drinking the milk anyway, this turns into a wonderful handy dandy planting container once its usefulness for a milk container is complete. In here I've started seeds for cilantro. This one has a couple of carrots growing in it. They'll grow down into this soil where I mixed in some sand and some mulch, and then I'll just be able to cut this thing open and harvest my carrots and start over again with the next batch. In here I have some more carrots seeded that haven't popped up yet. And here, there's a lot of places you can go that will have free, these tiny containers. You may be able to find some at leftovers at a gardening store, possibly for cheap or free. Or if there's a Master Gardener's area near you, or someplace, do a little research, you may be able to find some. We have some mixed greens growing in here, but think about just in this tiny little square footage plot that I have here, I am growing food inside of the house. And you can be doing that too, as long as you have that sun and the soil and the water. Planting something to grow your own food and become a little more self-sustaining goes a long way. And I know that kind of what I've shown you here has been a quick run through and not a lot of know-hows, but hopefully the ideas are being put inside of your brain and you can begin your research to go ahead in other places and really get going on your own garden. Alright, so again, the intent of this video was not necessarily to provide that major in-depth instruction on how to start a garden bit by bit, but hopefully you were able to gather a few things, at least enough to get going in the first place. And again, there's other great resources out there on YouTube and online, a lot of them that I've drawn from myself, including, like I said, Am I Gardener or Self-Sufficient Me. the other element here, though, is to hopefully just inspire you into the action towards your garden, because there's a lot of benefits from having a garden, whatever form it takes. And a lot of the ones that you hear regularly are the kind of standard hippie woo-woo ones. You know the source of your food, that's going to be healthier and more organic. You get the joy of feeding yourself and not having to rely on others. And those are all true, but I think there's a deeper meaning that a lot of times we forget to that, and or forget from this. And it's the idea that nature is good for you. Studies and studies and studies have been done showing that nature exposure increases pro-social behavior, meaning you're a better person when you spend time in nature. They've been able to make a direct connection between nature exposure and a boosted immune system, and an increase in serotonin and dopamine, and a reduction in anxiety and stress, and more creative outputs. All of these things have been shown direct links to those things and nature. And you know what your garden is? A version of nature. People that garden regularly live longer, have a lower risk of heart disease, and that's because they're physically active and there's a connection to nature that comes from it. Does the food taste better? Probably. I don't know if it actually does or doesn't, but in my mind it most certainly does, because I grew that. I protected that plant, I facilitated that, and I was invested in it, and that taste is so sweet. And that's another element to it, is that caring for and bringing up that plant to sustain yourself is meaningful. And especially in these pandemic times where so many people are not at work, or having to work from home, but they're only stuck at home, they're isolated from friends. We're isolated from friends, we're isolated from family, we're isolated from the places and people that may have once brought us meaning. Meaning is sustaining in a person, and a garden is a great way to find meaning and support yourself through a really emotionally, mentally challenging experience like all of us are facing with the COVID pandemic. So yeah, you should start a garden to feed yourself, because supply chains are starting to dwindle or be strained more heavily than we may have thought. Well, some of us anyway. But on top of that, it does more for you than just feed you. So hopefully what I've done is convince you to get started and given you kind of a bare bones pathway and directions to look to become your own gardener, starting a victory garden to support your friends, to support yourself, to support your family, and ultimately support the nation overall, as every part of our infrastructure groans from the stress of international supply chains coming short of what we have expected them to be in. So I hope you're out there staying happy and healthy as best you can. Don't get eaten by a bear. And remember, whatever you do for this land, you do for everybody. Godspeed.